Um, we're at the point right now that learning how to do debugging is very important. Some of the earlier assignments, debugging is always crucial, but in some of the earlier assignments, a bit easier. When we're talking about servlets, to stop the process of the execution of a servlet is a bit different. And so I'm going to show that process right now. You could actually do this in assignment number 4. The code that I'm going to show you would have to be reworked a little bit, but definitely for assignment 5, I think that you'll find it valuable. And again, this code could be reworked for assignment 4 as well because we're doing server-side data validation in assignment number 4. Let's take a look. Right now I have the Tomcat server running. I'm going to put some dummy data in there. First thing you want to do is just to find out what data is in there. So here I did a select all from customer. I see I have 10 records. And then you want to make sure that you have your server up and running. Gang, I cannot stress enough, I know I say this in class, but you always want to make sure that you look at the error messages, if there are any, in Tomcat. Sometimes there aren't. Sometimes it could be in the program logic itself. But many times there is an error message, and while it may be obtuse, it'll give you some insight into how to debug the application. All right, let's begin. We're going to throw some data in here. I have my video capture working right now, so it's a little bit slow, even with 8 gigs of RAM that I have. And just throw some data in here. I'm going to autofill it to make this go by a little bit more quickly. I'll put some dummy values, 100, 100, and to test for any cross-site scripting, I'm just going to put some HTML two-sided tags in there. I'm going to submit it. And as you know, in assignment 5, what's supposed to happen is supposed to go to the thanks. Or at least be processed by the servlet and then be forwarded to the thanks.js page, thanks.jsp page, and then printing those values to the user for the user's verification. But here it just says all text boxes required except notes. Well, something's happening inside the servlet and possibly the form that's giving us this incorrect forward right now, because we did add data. I'm going to go back here just to show you. You can see that we did add the data there, right? And it was the correct data. And so it should have been forwarded to the thanks.jsp page. Now I want to show something here, and I'm going to use Emacs ediff again. I'm hoping that you can see this as is. I'll make it a little bit larger, but then what's going to happen is some of the text will overlap. So it's only comments right now, so I don't think that's going to be too bad. I'll do this, and I'll make this a little bit larger as well too. Now I want to, first of all, I want to say something. If you look at the file names here in the lower left and lower right hand corners, this is actually a student's file that the student was having a little bit of issues with the servlet and came in for some debugging, and I demonstrated how we could do this. So here is the old file, okay, and here is the new file. All right, it's just customer list servlet old, customer list servlet.java, and this is the one that I'm going to show you how to do some debugging. First thing I'm going to do is go into this file here and show that when the user is, you can see this is actually diffing the showing the differences of the files. I'll get into this in a second. But the user captures the program captures the information from the form, right? Creates a customer object with that data, and then it tests for the data to make sure that the values are there. Now, I did it this way. One could make the argument, well, why don't you test the data values um, first before instantiating that object, and you can do that. The only reason I did that, it just seemed a little bit cleaner this way. Generally, though, what you would do is, in fact, do that. You would want to make sure that there was correct data in there. Then you would instantiate that object. One of the things that we're doing, though, is, if you'll notice in our else statement, is we're and that is in assignment number 5, we're passing a customer object to the insert method of our customer DB class. Now, we would get an error if we tried to do this later. So that's why we did if we instantiated this customer object later, we would get an error. And there's other ways, there's other workarounds as well too, but this was just a simple example. Okay, so capture the user information from the form. Okay, instantiate a customer object with the object variable called user right here. And you know that you're instantiating an object because you're using the new keyword. All right. We're doing some data validation. Admittedly, you'd want to make sure that this is only testing if the data is null or if it's empty. In other words, there is no data there. And you want to make sure you do both. Check for null, check for is empty. But we're not really doing any robust data validation here. And if this was a production environment application, you definitely would want to do that. It would be considerably more code, but you definitely would have to do that for a production environment. Now, if it is null or empty, what's going to happen is we're going to print out a message. We're going to assign the string all text boxes required except notes, put that into the variable message, and then in the variable URL, we would assign the customer form.jsp file, and then later on in the code, we would forward the user to that particular page. And this is actually customer form, and you could see that the errors is right here, indicating to the user. Now, again, in a production environment, you would want to keep all the user data in each one of the controls so they don't have to enter it again. And the other aspect is you want to make sure that you validate data accordingly, string, numeric, etc. But we did add data. Okay, we did add data here. So in each one of these controls from the form, we capture data, put it into the variables, we test it, and what's going on here? Why is it not going to the thanks page, which is the else path right here? Why is it not going to the thanks page? Well, what we could do is this. We can actually set up a file to do exactly that. Now, let me go back here. I'm going to diff these differences here between the file on the left and the file on the right. The file on the right has some code built into it that will stop the processing and actually print out the values to the servlet. Now let's take a look. You're seeing there's some differences here already. Now, I'm going to go into this file. I'm actually going to quit out of the diff process right now because I think that might be a bit confusing. And I'm going to show this line by line here. First of all, notice that everything is the same on the left-hand side, the old file, to the right-hand side where we're going to do the debugging, up until we instantiate a customer object. Now look at this. All of this code is going to be put into a method called isValidInput. Okay, isValidInput. Now we're going to call this method isValidInput. We're going to pass the variables that were actually initialized from the data from the form, and then we're going to take those variables, and we're going the same variables, by the way, that we used to instantiate a customer object, and then we're going to pass those variables to the method called isValidInput, the same exact variables. Okay, so all you have to do is just copy and paste all of these variables right here, and then paste them into this method call isValidInput. Okay, and then we're going to say if not isValidInput. In other words, we're looking at a Boolean method, Boolean returning method. Then if it is not valid, then what we're going to do is we're going to print out these values here. Now let's take a look. First of all, what I have to do to get this to work is I have to uncomment this. Now there's two areas here, gang. Number one, you would want to use this for developer testing only, right here. Developer testing only. In other words, stop the processing, print it out to the servlet. Okay, let's take a look. And then here, you would comment it back. You would comment this once in production, and then you would use this for production code. The exact same code, by the way, as we did over here, right? Exact same code here. Only we're moving the data validation to a method. Here, let me explain further. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now, this is not production environment, this is debugging. This is developer code right now. I'm going to comment these two lines because I don't want that to process. I want this to process. I'm going to uncomment this and explain a bit more. Okay, I'm going to save this because I'm going to have to recompile the servlet, stop the servers, restart the server, and then demonstrate. A couple things. Print line versus write. If you want to find out what the difference is, you can check out this URL right here. One is actually for character printing. The other is for printing of bytes, if you will, binary data, that is. And I'm using the print line method here, and I instantiated a using the print writer class. I'm getting the get writer method from the response object, and then I'm instantiating this object variable called out. You can call it whatever you want to, but when I do have this object variable, now what I could do is invoke the print line method on that object variable and then print out various values. Like for instance, right here, all I'm doing is saying, okay, we got some invalid input. What is that invalid input? Well, the invalid input is going to be, notice what I did was I concatenated a string called first name equals, in other words, the value of the first name, and then using the concatenation operator to plus the variable that I want to see what data is in there. Again, it's the same variable, gang, that's used in this method call right here, which, by the way, is the same variable that's used in the instantiation of passing to the constructor the variables. Here, they're arguments passed to the constructor that's going to instantiate a customer object. That customer object variable is called user, and then here those variables are actually initialized up here at the top. And again, those variables, the data comes from the customer form. Okay, I did that. Now, So here is the method call is valid input. Now what I'm going to do is going to jump down to the actual method itself. Now to do that, what I need to do is, oops, I hit the wrong keyboard command here. Let me close out of that. Okay, what I'm doing here is I am going to put this into its own page right now. Okay, so I can show, and then make this a little bit larger. So I can show the entire method. There. I made the call to this method, but I first have to define it. Remember, the calling environment must agree to the method signature in type, order, and number. So here, all the arguments used in the call are all string types. So I have to make sure that the parameters are going to be all string types as well too. Now, I didn't have to call them the same names as the arguments. I did only because, remember in our prior data validation, let me pull that up, in the old file, which I don't have right now, oh, I see what I did. Anyway, in the old file, the testing was done here, right? And it used the variables first name, last name, etc., right? Well, if I'm going to do the data validation, I'm going to have to keep these the same name, because it's saying first name, which is the parameter, to see if it's null, and then also see if it's empty. Last name, see if it's null, and also see if it's empty. If I change these parameter names, I'd have to change these variables or parameter names right here as well too. So I'm going to keep it the same thing. But look what's happening. The method, by the way, is from here to here. Okay. The last curly bracket on line 145 is actually the end of the class. But this is the actual end on line 144, the end of the method. And what's happening is if the parameter first name or last name is null or empty, what I'm going to do is return false back to the method call. If it's not null or not empty, I'm going to return true. So going back to the actual method call right here, if it's true, or I should say, in this particular situation, if it's true, that is valid. If it's not valid, if that is not valid, what I'm going to do is I'm going to print out the variable values to see what's being returned. So let's do that, okay? Just so you can see how this is work. I have to recompile this. I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to stop the server, shut it down, and I'm just going to recompile this one file here. Okay, so I'm going to recompile customer servlet, and then start the server again. I want to make sure I'm going to take a look at it, see if everything started up okay, and looks like everything did. And it's going through all of the applications that I have inside of web apps. And then I'm going to go back here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to here. And at this point, all this data is here. I'm going to hit submit. Let's make that a little bit larger. Now I could see invalid input, first name John, last name Duh. Okay, I got all that. What's this? What's this? Total sales null. Total sales null. That is why in the logic that it's being transferred to here. It's saying that, if you remember in the old file, that the message is going to be all text boxes required except notes, and then it's going to be forwarded to the customer form. And that's exactly what was happening, instead of being forwarded to the thanks page. But it didn't tell us much, right? Now we see why exactly it wasn't being passed to the thanks.jsp page. It was being passed back to customer form and saying that, hey, all of those form fields need to be filled out, but we filled them out. So it was hard to understand what the issue is. Now it's very easy to understand. Now all we have to do is find out, why is total sales null? Let's go back in the code. Okay, go all the way to the top of your file. Where are we getting the data for total sales? Just take a look at here. Okay, for the variable total sales, we're saying it's coming from the name field of customer form.jsp. So the total sales name attribute is passing that data. Okay, well, what do we need to do? At this point, what we need to do is go back into customer form and find out what's going on. We're going to go to that name attribute and see exactly why that data is not being passed to the servlet. And I can tell you right now, one of the issues is, let me make this larger. And you could see exactly what the problem is. The student was looking at the property of the customer class. Total sales, that's a property in the customer class, right? In assignment number 4. But that's not the name of the name attribute. So gang, this name attribute, total sales, has to match identically with customer list servlet. So this has to be this. Okay? Now let's try this again. I'm going to save this. I'm going to stop the servlet. Or I should say, shut down the server. Recompile. Let me see if it was saved. Yeah. Recompile the servlet. Start the server. Go back to my app. And let me hit, all I have to do now is just do refresh. Let's see if anything's changed. You can see it's still spinning here. Ah, what happened? Well, it went correctly to the thanks.jsp page. Why? Because that's what we had in our logic. There's total sales. In the logic here for the new servlet, once this method is called right here, once this method is called and it comes back as return true, that is, data is not missing, the next part of the logic is, okay, so if there is data, then we're going to go through the false path here, and that is go to the thanks page and then also insert a user. Now let's see if it actually inserted a user. Always have to go back to the actual data, gang. Let's do that. So we're going back to the data. We're going to do select all from customer and see what happens. And there it is right there. There's our record, John Doe, that we entered with the two-sided tag. It captured it as is. And now what you want to do to clean this up, all you have to do is go back to here. We're going to be in a production environment now. Comment this out because we don't want to give a heads up to any would-be hackers. So we could just do this, put this back like this. We again would want to save that, and we could keep this is valid input method to be used in our production application. Let's do this. Let's shut down a server, recompile the class, and start it up again. So now, if the user by accident misses data, let me make this smaller here. Now, if the user by accident misses data, say for total sales, it's not going to print out all those values because we wouldn't want that to be processed again to we wouldn't want to give out too much information to a potential would-be a hacker, someone trying to test the system. But we would want to also make sure that we give appropriate return to the user, right? You wouldn't just want to say all text boxes required except notes. I only did this for you, so it would be a lot easier to code. You would want to make sure that the data is put back into each one of the fields, and you would want to highlight exactly which field that data needs to be re-entered correctly. Okay? Hopefully, gang, this was helpful. And again, here is the code for that. All you have to do is make a call to the isValidInput method. You would modify your code accordingly as this. Actually, the else statement would be as before. Only this would be changed, the if part of it, because now all the data testing, the data validation, would be done, in fact, right here in this method. And that method is called isValidInput. Gang, you could pause that, take a look at it, and code yours exactly like that. Hopefully this was helpful. See you all in class.